The first day at a new school was never easy, and she knew it. She had moved from another town just a few weeks ago, and everything still felt strange. The hallways smelled like a mix of old floors and cafeteria food, and the chatter of students made her stomach twist with nerves. She kept her backpack tight against her chest and walked slowly, observing everything with careful eyes. She wanted to stay unnoticed, but she knew from past experience that some people would notice anyone who looked different, quiet or unsure. Her parents had always told her to be strong, to stand up for herself, but also to choose her battles wisely. They didn't know how much she had already learned about defending herself. Since she was a little girl, she had trained in karate. Her parents had signed her up for classes when they noticed she was often teased at her old school, and over time, she had earned her black belt. But no one at this new school had any idea. She didn't wear it like a badge or brag about it. To them, she was just another quiet student who didn't say much. Walking into the first classroom, she scanned the faces around her. Some students were already in groups, laughing and joking, while others were like her, sitting quietly and observing. She found a seat near the window and placed her bag down. She pulled out her notebook and began writing quietly, trying to focus on the teacher's introduction. But even as the teacher spoke, she couldn't stop noticing a small group of students at the back of the room. They were whispering and looking her way. She didn't pay too much attention at first, hoping they would lose interest, but a strange feeling told her they weren't just curious. By the second day, it became clear that the whispers and stares were not random. The same group of students, 3 or 4 in total, seemed to follow her in the hallways. They would laugh softly when she passed, and once she caught one of them pushing a chair slightly closer to her desk, as if to block her. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work and keeping her distance. But the tension was growing. It wasn't just a simple case of strangers being cautious. These students were bullies, and she could feel it in the way they moved, the way they looked at her. During lunch, she decided to sit alone, as usual. The cafeteria was loud and crowded, and she could hear the clatter of trays and the hum of conversation. She chose a corner table, hoping it would remain undisturbed. But before she could even open her lunchbox, she felt a shadow fall over her. She looked up, and there they were, the same group from her classes, smirking down at her. One of them leaned against the table, resting an arm on the edge as if claiming the space around her. "Well, well," one of them said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like we've got ourselves a quiet little new girl." The others laughed. She kept her expression calm, giving nothing away. Her heart was beating fast, but she didn't want to show fear. She'd been in situations like this before, and she knew the moment you react in fear, they gain power. "You new here?" Another asked, his tone more curious than threatening, but his eyes were calculating. "Yes," she replied simply. Her voice was steady, almost neutral. She didn't offer more information than necessary. "Quiet type, huh?" One of the girls sneered. "I bet you're scared of us already." She shook her head, keeping her eyes focused on her lunch. She knew that showing anger or fear would only fuel them. She had learned that in karate. Not every fight was physical, but confidence could be just as powerful. The bullies circled her table like predators, watching her every move. One of them leaned closer. "You don't talk much. I wonder what you'll do if we make you mad." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a calmness there that surprised him. "I handle myself," she said quietly. For a moment he laughed it off, thinking she was joking or bluffing. But there was something in her tone, something in her steady gaze that made him pause. She didn't flinch, she didn't smile nervously, and she didn't look away. That tiny moment of hesitation told her that even the bullies weren't entirely sure what she was capable of. They didn't leave. Instead, they started to press closer, making small movements to intimidate her, leaning in, brushing her arm lightly as if by accident, and making comments about her backpack, her hair, the way she sat. She endured it silently, her mind alert and aware like it always was during training. She had learned to sense threats, to stay ready. Even though she didn't move, her body remained alert, and her hands were subtly ready just in case. After what felt like an eternity, the lunch bell rang, and the bullies finally moved on, leaving her to breathe. She exhaled slowly but didn't let her guard down completely. She knew this was only the beginning. She could feel that this group wouldn't stop until they had tested her enough to confirm that she was not as tough as she seemed, or until she showed them they were wrong. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every glance felt heavier. Every laugh in the hallway seemed directed at her. By the time she got home, she was exhausted, not from physical exertion but from constant vigilance. She knew she couldn't fight them yet. She had to choose the right moment. She couldn't let herself get drawn into a fight on the first week. That would only make things worse. She needed to be smart, as much as she needed to be strong. That evening, she trained in her room, practicing her karate forms in front of a mirror. She moved with precision, focusing her energy, imagining potential attackers, and honing her reflexes. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about control, discipline, and readiness. The movements calmed her mind and strengthened her resolve. She had faced bullies before, and she knew the moment would come when she would need all her skills and all her courage. Meanwhile, the bullies were talking among themselves at school. They laughed about how easy they thought it would be to intimidate her, not realizing that their target was far from what they expected. They had chosen the wrong girl, and they didn't even know it. To them, she was just quiet, a newcomer, someone who wouldn't fight back. They couldn't imagine that beneath her calm exterior, there was a black belt who had spent years mastering self-defense and learning discipline. She didn't boast about her skills to anyone. She didn't need to. She knew who she was, and she knew what she could do if necessary. The first week at the new school was a test, not just of her ability to defend herself, but of her patience and her strategy. She observed, she listened, and she learned the patterns of the bullies. She could predict their movements, their comments, and their likely attempts to provoke her. By the end of the week, she had made a few cautious friends, students who were kind and respectful, who appreciated her calm demeanor and her intelligence. They didn't know about her training either, but they admired her quiet confidence. Even without speaking much, she had earned a small circle of respect, and while the bullies had not been stopped yet, she felt ready for what would come. She reflected on the day's events and on the bullies' behavior. She understood that their attacks weren't personal. They were driven by their need to control, to dominate, and to prove themselves. But she also knew that they had picked the wrong person to intimidate. She wasn't going to show fear. She wasn't going to retaliate rashly. She would wait for the right moment, and when that moment came, she would demonstrate that strength isn't always loud or aggressive. It can be quiet, focused, and incredibly effective. As night fell, she packed her school things for the next day. She felt a mix of nerves and determination, the same mix she had felt in karate tournaments before. She knew challenges would come, but she also knew she was ready. The bullies thought they could push her around, but she had her skills, her mind, and her patience. She wasn't just another quiet girl. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and she was prepared to show them when the time was right. The next week at school began like any other, but she could feel the air was different. The bullies had been watching her, whispering and pointing, their eyes following her in the hallways. She had kept her distance, walked straight, and ignored them, but she knew their patience had limits. They were testing her, looking for any sign of weakness, any reaction they could exploit. During her first class, she noticed them again, seated together at the back, laughing quietly. One of the boys nudged another, and they both stared in her direction, whispering and smirking. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She kept her eyes on the teacher, pretending not to notice, but every muscle in her body remained alert. She had learned long ago that staying calm under pressure could confuse people just as much as reacting aggressively. At lunch, she went to the cafeteria early, hoping to get a table before the bullies arrived. She carried her tray, scanning the room carefully. She found a quiet spot near the windows and placed her lunch down, but before she could even take a bite, she felt the familiar presence behind her. The bullies were there. They didn't even bother to hide their intentions this time. "Well, look who it is," the girl in the group said, leaning casually against a table near her. "Thought you could hide from us, huh?" The others laughed, circling around her. One of the boys stepped forward, jabbing a finger lightly toward her. "You don't even look like you can fight back. Are you sure you're not scared?" She kept her gaze steady, but inside her heart was beating faster. She didn't need to show fear, but she knew she had to be ready. Their movements were not random. They were testing her, trying to make her react. She remembered her training and stayed calm, focusing on her breathing and posture. "I'm not scared," she said quietly, her voice controlled, "but I don't like bullying." Her words seemed to confuse them. They expected her to stammer or try to run away, but instead she spoke calmly. They laughed, thinking she was joking, but the sound didn't hide the unease growing in them. One of the boys tried to push her shoulder lightly, expecting her to flinch. She didn't. Instead, she leaned slightly back, maintaining balance, her movements smooth and controlled. The result of years of training she had never shown anyone. Another tried to grab her bag, but she twisted easily, moving it out of reach. Every subtle action she took told the bullies something they hadn't expected. She was not weak. Frustration flashed across their faces. They weren't used to being challenged, even in small ways. Most of their targets would cry, apologize, or try to fight back with anger and clumsiness. She offered neither. Her calm and composure seemed to unsettle them more than aggression could. Then one of the bullies tried a bolder move. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're tough, don't you? Let's see how tough you really are." He jabbed her shoulder again, harder this time. She barely moved, stepping aside with the same ease she had used in training. The bullies laughed nervously, their confidence wavering. They whispered to each other, confused by her lack of reaction. The girl could feel the tension building. She wasn't looking for trouble, but she was ready to defend herself if it escalated. Suddenly, another student accidentally bumped into the table, spilling a little water. The noise startled the bullies just enough to break their rhythm. She saw the opening. Not to attack, but to assert control. She stood, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. The bullies instinctively stepped back, sensing something different in her stance. It wasn't threatening in a violent way, but it carried authority. "You don't need to try so hard," she said, her voice calm, but firm. "I can handle myself." Her words hung in the air and the bullies hesitated. They had never met someone like her before. Most people would have cowered, yelled, or run. She did none of those things. She didn't need to prove her strength with brute force. Her confidence was enough to unsettle them. One of the girls in the group tried to laugh it off, moving closer. "You're just a scared little girl. No one's going to take you seriously." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she assessed the situation, the distance between them, the angles of their movements, the tension in their bodies. In her mind, she ran through countless scenarios she had practiced in karate, imagining the outcomes, ready to act if necessary. She was in control even though no one knew it. The bullies tried to push further, closing in, but something in their expressions had changed. They were unsure, their earlier confidence slipping. The boy who had been the most aggressive paused, frowning. He whispered to the others, his bravado weakening. That pause was enough. She leaned slightly forward, not to strike, but to demonstrate readiness. Her movements were fluid, measured. She didn't raise her fists, she didn't yell, she didn't make threats. She simply moved like someone who knew exactly what to do if pushed too far. The effect was immediate. The bullies backed away slightly, their laughter faltering. They had expected fear or anger, not calm confidence and control. The cafeteria, filled with students who had been watching quietly, felt a shift in energy. Even those who didn't know her could sense that this wasn't a normal situation. Something about her presence demanded respect. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, her tone steady. "Don't test me." The words were quiet but carried weight. The bullies exchanged glances, uncertainty growing. They had assumed this girl would be easy to intimidate. They had no idea she had spent years mastering the kind of skills that made her ready for situations just like this. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The bullies, still unsure, moved away, muttering to each other. They weren't defeated, but they were no longer confident. The other students watched her leave, some with curiosity, some with admiration. Even though she had not engaged in a fight, her control and calmness had made a statement. She walked through the hallways after lunch with her usual quiet determination. She knew this was only the beginning. The bullies would come back and they might try other tactics. But now they had learned a lesson. She was not the kind of person they could push around. She could defend herself, and she would if necessary. When she got home that afternoon, she reflected on the day. The confrontation hadn't escalated into violence, but it had tested her patience, her awareness, and her confidence. She knew that the next encounter might be more aggressive, and she needed to be ready. She practiced her forms in her room again, moving through each motion with focus. Each kick, each block, each step reminded her of her strength and discipline. She didn't crave conflict, but she was prepared to protect herself if it came. At school the following days, she noticed subtle changes. The bullies still watched her, but now with caution. They whispered among themselves more carefully, testing boundaries but avoiding direct confrontation. Other students began to notice as well. Some who had been targets of bullying in the past looked at her with hope, seeing that someone could stand strong without aggression. She began to realize that strength wasn't just about physical ability. It was about presence, awareness, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. By maintaining her composure, she had shifted the power dynamic without throwing a single punch. And yet she remained humble, not wanting attention or recognition. She knew that one misstep, one wrong move, could escalate things unnecessarily. One afternoon, as she walked through the hallway, one of the bullies stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His expression was more cautious than before. "You're different," he said, almost reluctantly. "I'm just me," she replied softly, stepping aside to continue walking. Her body remained ready, balanced and alert, but she did not provoke further. That moment lingered in her mind. She realized that sometimes the hardest part of standing strong wasn't fighting. It was patience, restraint, and letting others reveal their intentions while you stayed in control. She had learned that lesson years ago in karate, and now it applied to life as well. By the end of the week, the bully's behavior had shifted. They no longer attempted physical intimidation, though they still whispered and glanced in her direction. She had changed the rules of engagement simply by being confident, calm, and aware. Other students began to show subtle signs of respect, giving her space and observing from afar. At home that night, she thought about what was coming next. She knew the bullies might return with more daring attempts. She had to remain ready, not just with her skills but with her mind. Strategy, patience, and self-control were as important as strength. She trained a little longer, practicing her forms, imagining potential scenarios, and reinforcing her confidence. The first real test had passed. She had stood her ground without aggression, without losing control, and without giving them the satisfaction of fear. But she also knew that this was just the beginning of a larger challenge. The bullies had underestimated her, and she had made them realize that, and she would be ready for whatever came next. The days after the first lunch encounter passed quietly, but she could feel the tension building. The bullies had stopped direct harassment for now, but she knew it was only temporary. They were waiting for another chance, testing her patience and observing her movements. She walked through the halls with steady steps, paying attention to their positions, noticing every glance and whisper. Her mind was always alert, ready to respond, but she never overreacted. By midweek, the bullies decided it was time for a new plan. They cornered her after school near the lockers, a place usually empty and shadowed. This time there was no hiding, no easy escape. She had anticipated the possibility and remained calm, knowing that showing fear would only encourage them. She leaned against the wall slightly, her posture relaxed but alert, her hands subtly ready. Well, looks like we caught you alone," one of them sneered. The girl standing closest smirked, enjoying the thrill of power. "Thought you were too smart to walk by yourself?" Her eyes followed their movements carefully. She didn't need to speak yet. Her silence alone was unsettling. The bullies circled slowly, expecting her to panic, but she remained composed. They could see that she was tense but not frightened, and that small difference made them uncertain. One of the boys moved closer, pretending to reach for something on the floor, then jabbing lightly at her shoulder as he straightened. "You really think you can stand up to us?" he asked, voice mocking. Her lips pressed together and she exhaled slowly. "I can handle myself," she said softly. Her calm tone paired with her steady gaze seemed to confuse them. Most people would shout or protest in fear. She did neither. The bullies exchanged glances. Confidence like hers was rare. They had underestimated her before, and that mistake had made them cautious. They weren't used to hesitation from anyone, and her calmness created a gap in their strategy. Then one of the girls lunged, trying to push her against the lockers. She moved with precision, sidestepping easily and letting the girl stumble forward slightly, not forceful enough to hurt her, just enough to regain space. The other bullies froze for a split second, their surprise evident. This was not the reaction they expected. "You think this is a game?" the boy asked, stepping forward. She remained still, her breathing controlled. Every movement she made was deliberate, minimal, and efficient. She didn't strike. She simply shifted her weight to maintain balance, ready to defend herself if needed. One of the girls attempted another push, swinging an arm toward her shoulder. This time she reacted faster, gently redirecting the motion with her forearm and taking a small step back. The move was subtle, almost invisible to an untrained eye, but it demonstrated her skill. The bullies hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. The hallway felt smaller as the tension rose. A few students walking home paused, sensing that something serious was happening. Their curiosity added to the pressure, but she didn't let it distract her. She had trained for moments like this. The main boy, growing frustrated, tried a more aggressive tactic. He moved quickly, attempting to grab her wrist. She twisted her arm gently, stepping aside, making it impossible for him to hold on. Her movements were calm but precise, as if she were performing the same patterns she practiced during karate lessons. The bullies were no longer laughing. They were anxious, unsure. "You're faster than I thought," one of them muttered. The words were whispered, but they betrayed fear. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. She was capable, prepared, and fully aware. They had assumed she would panic, that she would flinch or yell. They had underestimated her. Then, in a moment of recklessness, one of the girls swung a backpack at her, aiming for her head. She ducked instinctively, letting it glance harmlessly past her shoulder. That small act made the others freeze. They could see now that she wasn't just quick, she was alert, ready for anything. "Enough," she said quietly, her voice firm. "Step back." Her words carried authority. The bullies hesitated again. They were used to targets cowering, apologizing, begging for mercy. This girl didn't beg. She didn't plead. She simply stood her ground, calm, ready, and confident. That presence alone unsettled them more than her movements ever could. For a few seconds, the hallway was silent except for their breathing. Then one of the boys tried a final move. He lunged forward, aiming to grab her. She moved like water, sidestepping and pivoting. Her action was precise, using his own momentum to guide him forward without force. He stumbled slightly, caught off guard, and the others reacted with surprise. The students in the hallway, watching from a distance, gasped softly. No one had seen her fight before, and even this subtle display of control was enough to shock them. She hadn't struck anyone, yet she had demonstrated dominance and skill in a way that left the bullies disoriented. "Stop," she said again, her voice calm but unyielding. She could see the tension in their faces, the shift from confidence to uncertainty. They had no idea how strong she really was, and her restraint only made them more nervous. The main boy finally raised his hand slightly, an unspoken sign of retreat. The bullies backed away, muttering and exchanging nervous glances. They weren't defeated, but they had learned a hard lesson. She was not someone they could intimidate easily. She didn't pursue them. She didn't need to. She simply stayed calm, maintaining her posture, her gaze steady. The bullies slunk off down the hallway, avoiding eye contact. The other students, still lingering nearby, watched her pass with a mix of awe and curiosity. Walking to her next class, she felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. She hadn't used violence, but she had shown that she was not to be underestimated. She had handled herself, and that was enough for now. At home that evening, she replayed the events in her mind. She analyzed every movement, every action, every response. There had been no panic, no anger, only control. She realized that strength wasn't just about physical ability. It was also about strategy, awareness, and confidence. Her training had taught her that, but now it was proving true in real life. The next few days at school continued similarly. The bullies were still around, but they were cautious. They watched from a distance, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out how to approach her next. Her calm confidence had changed the dynamics. She was no longer a quiet girl to push around. She was someone to observe carefully, someone who could handle herself. Some students who had been targets of bullying began to notice. They looked at her with quiet admiration, realizing that strength could be subtle, that standing firm didn't always require aggression. She didn't seek attention or recognition, but her actions were having an impact. Even the teachers noticed something had shifted. There was a quiet authority in her presence, a confidence that commanded respect without words. She remained polite, attentive, and focused on her studies, but the way she carried herself left a mark. Despite the victories, she knew the real test was still coming. The bullies might try again, perhaps with more daring or more aggressive tactics. She had to stay ready, not just physically but mentally. She trained every evening, practicing forms, reviewing scenarios, and reinforcing her confidence. Each movement reminded her that she was capable, prepared, and disciplined. By the end of the week, the bullies had learned to give her space, but there was a lingering tension. They were unsure, cautious, and frustrated by their inability to intimidate her. That tension created curiosity among other students. Whispers spread about the girl who could stand up to the bullies without even hitting them. Her reputation grew quietly, not through boasting, but through the way she carried herself and handled situations. She reflected on the events and realized an important lesson. Real strength was not always shown through fighting. It was shown through calmness, awareness, and the ability to control oneself. It was also about knowing when to act and when to wait. She had practiced this in karate for years, and now it applied perfectly to life outside the dojo. By Friday afternoon, she felt prepared for whatever might come next. She had stood her ground, tested her limits, and observed the bullies' reactions. She knew that the next encounter might escalate further, and she had to be ready for it. As she walked home, she thought about the lessons she had learned. Patience, control, awareness, and strategy. These were her greatest weapons. She didn't crave violence, but she would not back down. She was not just a quiet girl. She was someone who could defend herself, someone who commanded respect simply by standing firm. The week had tested her patience, her courage, and her skill. She had passed the test, but she knew the journey was far from over. The bullies had underestimated her once. Next time, they might push harder. And when that moment came, she would be ready, not just to defend herself, but to show that strength could be quiet, controlled, and powerful. And she felt ready for that moment to come. The following week began with an almost electric tension in the air. She could feel it as soon as she stepped into the school, like a quiet storm waiting to erupt. The bullies had grown more restless. Their whispers were sharper, their glances harder, and she could sense their impatience. They had spent the last few days observing her, trying to predict her behavior, and now they were ready to push further. She walked through the hallways with her usual calm demeanor, backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning her surroundings with quiet awareness. Every step, every glance was deliberate. She had learned that confidence was as much about posture and presence as it was about skill. Even the smallest hesitation could give them a foothold, and she refused to provide one. By mid-morning, the first encounter happened. The bullies had cornered her in a narrow hallway near the gym, a place where there were few students passing through. The walls were lined with lockers, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the floor. She stopped and turned to face them, her expression calm but firm. They circled her like predators, whispering insults and taunts, testing her once again. "You really think you're untouchable?" one of the boys sneered, stepping closer. Her gaze remained steady. "I can handle myself," she repeated, her voice even but firm. She didn't need to shout. The calmness in her tone carried more weight than anger ever could. The bullies exchanged glances. They had grown frustrated over the past week. Their usual tactics hadn't worked. They expected her to react with fear or anger, but she had remained composed, aware, and prepared. That composure made them nervous, unsure of how to proceed. One of the girls lunged forward, attempting to push her against the lockers. She shifted effortlessly, redirecting the motion with her body, not using force but controlling the momentum. The girl stumbled slightly, and the others froze for a moment, realizing that she was not like anyone they had faced before. The tension in the hallway grew thick, almost tangible. The bullies tried to coordinate, moving closer together, hoping to intimidate her with numbers. She observed their movements, noting the gaps, the angles, and the openings. She didn't want to fight unless it became absolutely necessary, but she was ready. Every instinct honed in years of karate training was alert and focused. Suddenly, one of the boys made a reckless move. He lunged, aiming to grab her arm. She reacted instantly, pivoting and using his momentum to step aside, maintaining perfect balance. His surprise was evident, and he stumbled forward slightly. The other bullies hesitated, their earlier bravado fading under the weight of her controlled movements. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her voice calm but carrying authority. The words struck deeper than any physical blow. They weren't used to being spoken to like that, quietly, firmly, without fear or anger. Most targets would have shouted, cried, or panicked. She did neither, and that was what unsettled them the most. Then the first real strike came. One of the girls swung a backpack toward her head, aiming to hit her. She ducked instinctively, letting the backpack glance harmlessly past her shoulder. That motion was enough to make the others stop in their tracks. Her reaction was precise, fluid, and almost instinctive. They realized she wasn't just alert. She was trained, experienced, and in control. The main boy, growing desperate, attempted another move. He tried to grab her wrist, intending to pull her off balance. She twisted her arm gently, stepping aside and using minimal force to redirect him. He stumbled slightly, caught off guard. The other bullies looked at each other nervously, unsure of what to do next. "You're different," one whispered under his breath, almost as if admitting it reluctantly. Her calm stance didn't waver. She didn't need to shout or hit. Her presence alone conveyed that she was ready and capable. The bully's confidence faltered, replaced by a mixture of fear, confusion, and frustration. They had underestimated her, and now it was clear that they had chosen the wrong target. Seeing their hesitation, she took a slow step forward, not aggressive but assertive. Her posture, steady and controlled, made them instinctively take a step back. She didn't need to strike to show strength. Her control of the space around her was enough to command respect. One of the boys, frustrated beyond patience, decided to act recklessly. He swung at her, aiming for her shoulder with force. She blocked the motion smoothly, redirecting his momentum, and used a small pivot to place herself behind him. He stumbled forward, barely catching himself, and the other bullies froze. The hallway felt like it was holding its breath. "You should have thought before you came after me," she said quietly, her words measured, her tone calm. By now, the students who were passing by had stopped, sensing that something serious was unfolding. Some of them moved closer but cautiously, not wanting to get involved. They watched in awe as she remained completely in control, facing multiple aggressors without panic, without anger, without fear. The bullies regrouped quickly, trying to overwhelm her with numbers. One girl lunged again while another boy tried a grab from the side. She moved like water, stepping aside, blocking, redirecting, and maintaining her balance with precision. Her movements were not violent. They were defensive, fluid, and controlled. But each action sent a clear message. She was not someone to be bullied. The bullies' attempts became more frantic. They shouted, tried to push her, and jabbed at her, but nothing seemed to work. Each time they lunged, she anticipated the motion, deflected it, and maintained her composure. The hallway echoed with the sounds of their frustration, but she remained calm, her breathing steady, her movements deliberate. One of the girls tried a final desperate move, swinging a fist toward her. She blocked it with perfect timing, stepping forward to create space and using a small twist to unbalance the attacker without hurting her. The boy who had tried to grab her earlier froze, clearly realizing that the fight was slipping out of their control. "You're stronger than we thought," one of them muttered, their voice tinged with fear. She didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. Her calm, unyielding presence said everything. She wasn't aggressive, but she was fully capable of defending herself, and anyone else if necessary. The bullies were now unsure, hesitant, and wary. Their earlier confidence was gone, replaced by nervous glances and whispered arguments among themselves. For a few moments, the hallway was silent except for their breathing. She stayed composed, her posture straight, her eyes steady. She didn't need to strike again. The bullies could feel that she had control, and that realization alone shifted the power dynamic completely. Finally, one of the bullies, the most aggressive of the group, backed away and motioned for the others to do the same. They didn't flee, but they retreated cautiously, muttering under their breath. She didn't move toward them, didn't chase them. She simply stood in the hallway, calm and composed, letting them understand that they had been defeated, not by anger or violence, but by control, awareness, and quiet strength. The other students who had been watching now started whispering among themselves. Some looked impressed, some in awe. A few approached her cautiously, offering quiet nods or smiles of respect. Even without a single punch thrown, she had made her presence felt. She had defended herself fully and made it clear that bullying her was not an option. Walking to her next class, she felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The confrontation had escalated to a point she had anticipated, and she had handled it perfectly. No one had been seriously hurt, but the bullies had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. She had shown that strength could be quiet, controlled, and immensely powerful. That evening at home, she reflected on the events. She had faced multiple attackers at once and had come through unscathed. Her training had prepared her for this moment. But she also realized that real-life situations required more than just skill. They required patience, strategy, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. She trained that night, moving through her forms with precision and focus. Each motion reminded her of her discipline, her strength, and her preparedness. She didn't crave conflict, but she had proven to herself that she could handle it if necessary. The world wasn't always fair and sometimes people misjudged her. But now she knew that she could face them confidently, without fear. By the end of the week, the bullies' behavior had changed dramatically. They no longer tried to corner her or provoke her. Their whispers became more cautious, their movements more tentative. They had learned that she was not someone to underestimate, and their fear of another confrontation kept them at bay. Other students began to notice her calm strength. Those who had been targets of bullying before looked at her with newfound hope, seeing someone who could stand firm without aggression and inspire respect. Teachers, too, noted her quiet confidence, though she never sought attention or praise. She remained focused on her studies, her training, and her own growth. She realized an important truth. Strength wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and strategic. Knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to maintain control was far more powerful than brute force. She had demonstrated that to herself, to the bullies, and to everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. And even though the battle in the hallway had ended, she knew life would bring more challenges. But she also knew that with her skills, her awareness, and her calm confidence, she could face them all. She wasn't just a quiet girl at a new school. She was someone who commanded respect, someone who could stand up for herself and others, someone who had proven that true strength could be quiet, controlled, and unyielding. After the hallway confrontation, life at school changed in subtle but important ways. She walked through the corridors with the same quiet confidence, but now, there was a noticeable shift in how people looked at her. Whispers followed her, not mocking this time, but curious, even respectful. Some students who had previously avoided her now made a small effort to nod or smile. She didn't seek attention, but her actions had naturally earned it. The bullies, for their part, had noticeably changed. They no longer tried to intimidate her openly. Their whispered plans, the tiny pushes, and the mocking glances all stopped. It wasn't because they had given up entirely, but because they had learned a hard lesson. They had picked the wrong girl to harass, someone who didn't react out of fear, anger, or humiliation. Her calmness, her control, and her skill had left a stronger impression than any argument or fight could have. Even with this shift, she remained vigilant. She knew that school was full of unpredictable moments, and she couldn't assume that peace meant safety. Every hallway, every class, every lunch period was an opportunity to observe and be aware. She had trained herself to notice small details: body language, the tone of whispers, the subtle movements of people around her. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. During one class, a fellow student, someone who had been quiet and hesitant before, approached her after the teacher left. "I saw what happened in the hallway," the student said softly. You were amazing. You didn't even have to fight, and they couldn't do anything to you." She gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "I just stayed calm." "That's often more powerful than reacting with anger." The student nodded, clearly impressed. "I wish I could be like that," they admitted. "You can," she said simply. "It just takes practice. Being calm, aware, and ready, it's something anyone can learn." Word about her skills spread slowly but surely. Other students began to approach her, not with fear or mockery, but with curiosity and admiration. She became someone people could rely on, someone who represented calm strength in situations where others might panic. She didn't boast, but she quietly became a role model for self-confidence and self-respect. The bullies, while no longer openly aggressive, still lingered at the edges of her awareness. Occasionally, one of them would glance her way, their expressions a mix of wariness and frustration. She had taught them a lesson. Appearances could be deceiving, and underestimating someone could backfire badly. That lesson would stay with them far longer than any punishment or lecture from teachers. One day during gym class, an incident occurred that reminded everyone of her presence and skill. A group of students began arguing over a game, voices raised, tempers flaring. The bullies tried to join in, attempting to assert control as they often did in moments of chaos. But before the situation escalated, she stepped forward calmly. "Stop," she said, her voice low but firm. The command wasn't loud, but it carried authority. The room fell quiet, and even the teacher noticed. "This isn't how we solve things," she added. "We can figure this out without pushing, shoving, or yelling." Her calmness had an immediate effect. The students paused, reconsidering their actions. The bullies looked at her with a mix of surprise and caution. realizing that her authority extended beyond defending herself. It was about presence, confidence, and respect. The argument de-escalated, and the teacher later commented privately that her intervention had prevented what could have been a serious confrontation. At home that evening, she reflected on the events of the past weeks. She had come to a new school expecting challenges, and the bullies had been the first real test. They had underestimated her, and she had shown that true strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and strategic. It was about staying calm under pressure, being aware of your surroundings, and choosing the right moment to act. Her parents noticed a change as well. She seemed even more composed, confident, and self-assured. They didn't need to ask what had happened. Her demeanor spoke for itself. She didn't boast about her skills or the incidents at school, but they could see the quiet pride in her posture, the calm way she handled herself, and the maturity in her responses. Over the next few months, the school environment gradually shifted. The bullies no longer targeted anyone recklessly, and their attempts at intimidation diminished further. The other students learned from observing her example. Confidence, calmness, and preparedness were far more powerful than aggression or fear. She had changed the dynamic without seeking recognition or reward, simply by being herself and by staying true to her skills and principles. In class, she focused on her studies, participating thoughtfully when asked and remaining observant of the social dynamics around her. She didn't dominate conversations or seek leadership, but her presence influenced those around her. Students who had been timid or unsure began to mirror her calm confidence in small ways, whether by speaking up more, standing firm against teasing, or helping peers in need. The bullies, slowly learning humility, began to alter their behavior. They weren't transformed overnight, and some resentment lingered, but they now approached others with more caution and awareness. They had learned firsthand that appearances could be misleading, and underestimating someone could have immediate consequences. Over time, they began to respect boundaries more, not just with her but with other students as well. One afternoon, as she left school, one of the bullies approached her not with aggression, but with a hesitant acknowledgement. I didn't think you were like that," he said quietly. "I guess we were wrong." She didn't need to respond with harsh words or gloating. She simply nodded slightly. Her calm acknowledgement was enough. No anger, no revenge, just quiet confidence and self-respect. That small interaction marked the first step toward understanding and change. Life at school continued, with new challenges and experiences, but she faced them all with the same composed, aware mindset. The lessons she had learned through her training, patience, control, focus, and readiness, applied far beyond karate. They applied to friendships, classroom situations, social interactions, and even moments of conflict that had nothing to do with the bullies. She also began helping other students quietly. Those who had been targets of teasing or intimidation sometimes approached her for advice or reassurance. She offered guidance without judgment, showing them that strength came from confidence and awareness rather than retaliation or aggression. Her influence spread gradually, creating a small but meaningful ripple of respect and empowerment within the school. Over time, she noticed a shift not just in the bullies, but in the school culture. The air felt lighter, less tense, and more respectful. Students were more cautious about mocking or intimidating others. They had seen, directly or indirectly, the consequences of underestimating someone who could defend themselves while remaining calm and composed. Respect replaced fear in many situations, and the school began to feel like a place where fairness and awareness mattered more. She never sought attention for these changes. She didn't want recognition or accolades. She understood that true influence often came quietly, without notice. She focused on her own growth, her training, and her studies while letting her actions speak for themselves. The calm strength she demonstrated had a lasting effect, not only on the bullies who had attacked her but on the students who observed and learned from her example. Months later, looking back, she realized how much she had grown. The new school that had initially felt intimidating and overwhelming had become a place where she understood her own power, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. She had faced challenges, stood firm, and emerged stronger. She had taught lessons not by aggression but by calmness, awareness, and confidence. The bullies had changed too. Some continued to struggle with pride and control, but they no longer harassed her or others openly. They had learned to recognize strength where they hadn't expected it, and to respect boundaries they once ignored. The lesson that underestimating someone could backfire was now ingrained, shaping how they interacted with peers. Her journey also left her with a deeper understanding of herself. She realized that being underestimated could sometimes be an advantage, allowing her to act without pressure or expectation. She had discovered the power of patience, observation, and strategic thinking, and she had proven that strength could be quiet, controlled, and influential without causing harm unnecessarily. In the end, she didn't need to strike or fight to show her worth. Her calm, prepared, and confident approach had been enough to shift dynamics, earn respect, and make a lasting impact. The school environment had improved, the bullies had learned their lessons, and other students found inspiration in her example. She continued her life at the school with focus and determination, aware that challenges would continue to arise. But she faced each day knowing that true strength wasn't just about physical skill. It was about awareness, patience, and composure. She had proven it to herself, to the bullies, and to everyone who observed her. And in that quiet, confident way she moved through the halls, attended classes, and interacted with others. She carried a lasting lesson. Courage, calm, and control could change not just one's own life, but the lives of those around them. Strength didn't always need to be loud to be powerful, and respect could be earned through presence, awareness, and unwavering composure. By the end of the year, her reputation was no longer defined by being quiet or unassuming. She was known as someone who could handle herself, someone whose calm strength commanded respect, and someone whose influence had quietly changed the school for the better. The bullies had been taught a lesson they wouldn't forget, and the students who had witnessed her actions had learned a model of quiet power and self-assurance that would stay with them for years to come. She had arrived at the new school expecting challenges, and she had faced them fully. She had turned potential fear into strength, potential conflict into calm control, and had shown that being true to oneself, prepared, and confident could overcome even the most difficult situations. And that, she realized, was the most important lesson of all.